Good evening, everybody. I hope you're all doing well today. Please just give me 1 second to quickly double check, make sure everything is working on my end. Does appear to be working, which is always good. And I do apologize if you hear some jingling in the background. I don't know if the mic is going to pick it up or not, but my cat is going absolutely ham on one of her toys in the background. And it has a bell on it. A damaged bell, so it's not as loud as it could be, but a bell nonetheless. So any jingling you hear is going to be the result of that. Okay, but so yeah, everything does seem to be working on my end, which is definitely good. And let me just get some music going. I think this will be good. Okay, got some music. Let me pull that up and then get my other stuff all set up, just about ready to go. The one thing that I should say before we get started for real is these VODs are going to be unlisted from now on. The streams, of course, are going to be public, but it will be available in a playlist afterwards, because I noticed that on my dashboard or my homepage, I was getting way too many recommendations for VODs, and that's just not my primary content, so I didn't want to clog up people's feeds with my VODs. I'd rather them see my actual videos and not have those get buried. So VODs are going to be unlisted, but they're going to be available via playlists that you can find from my YouTube page. So that's going to be it. Well, VODs on YouTube at least. If you're on Twitch and Kick, the VODs will stay as they've always been. So that's enough of a preamble for that. So we're going to get this all finished today. So let's just get right started. Oh, I should probably edit the YouTube title just so I can... There we go. I just wanted to make sure people know where we're at. Okay, so let's get going. Chapter 13, Failure, Chaos, and Resolve. Having slain the Red Hood Cobra, our party headed back to the Adventurers Guild. As always, we met up with Jaleel outside the building itself to exchange our task cards. We also handed over the snake's fangs and skin and worked out our stories to make sure they stayed consistent. There was a large amount of stuff to carry this time, so for once we all headed over into the guild, even Viskel. The moment we set foot inside, Nokapara came sidling up to us. It seriously felt like the guy never left this place, or left us alone. Again, a little bit more, hinting at what's going to be dealing with, because, he makes his money not from actually adventuring, but from extortion. Hey there, looks like you've been hunting some real interesting prey. Are those Red Hood Cobra scales I see? Well... I glanced over at Jaleel, prompting him to trot out the story we worked out in advance. Yeah, that's right. We got lucky and ran into the thing when it was already real weak. You two took down a Red Hood, huh? Nokapata stared down Jaleel with something that looked like a condescending smirk on his horsey face. What's going on here? He seems kind of different today. We found the bodies of the Super Blazers guys before we ran into it, actually. They must have softened it up before they died. What? Hold on, you saying Blaze is dead? Yeah. Damn. Guess that's how it goes when you run into a Red Hood, though. Nokapata said with a disinterested snort. Still, even if it was weakened up, it's hard to imagine you and Viskel taking one of those monsters down. Well, it wasn't just weakened, really. It was almost dead. I mean, you could almost say it was dead. It was still breathing, yeah, but it was basically a goner, you know? Jaleel, speaking a bit too rapidly now, chose this moment to walk hurriedly away. Nokapata didn't seem to be satisfied yet, though, and turned his attention to us. So, you guys find some lost pet again today, or what? Yeah, Master Jaleel's taught us some excellent techniques. We managed to earn ourselves a bit more pocket money today. Something felt a little off about this conversation. I tried to slip away and walk off quickly like Jaleel had, but just as I began moving, Nokapata slung his arm around my shoulders in a weirdly intimate way, and leaned over to whisper in my ear. So tell me, how exactly were you hunting down pets outside the city? For just an instant, I stopped moving, but I think I managed to keep my poker face on. This was a situation I'd planned for. He'd only seen us heading out of Rikarisu. I could talk my way out of that. It just happened to wander outside of town this time. Oh, really? So what then? This time, Nokapata grabbed Jaleel firmly by the shoulders. Did that Red Hood Cobra just happen to be inside the city too? Okay, so he'd seen Jaleel and Viskel around town as well. In other words, the jig was up. Very strange. Lots of odd things happening these days. I'd given some thought to this scenario. We did have some options to deal with it. For example, I could blame everything on Jalil. If I insisted he was forcing us to do dangerous, high-rank work against our will, I could wriggle my way out of the immediate crisis. I wasn't going to go down that route, though. If I did, Ruijerd might cut off ties with me for good. It was conduct unbefitting of a warrior, after all. Come on, guys. Just fess up already, why don't you? To what exactly? I asked. Have we done something wrong? Huh? We helped out with P-Hunter's job, and P-Hunter helped out with ours. Is that such a big deal? Instead of sticking to lies and cover stories, I chose to give the so-what approach a try. I looked over the guild regulations a second time a while ago, and there definitely wasn't any clear rule against what we were doing. Of course, that didn't mean people would be okay with it. You don't get to do anything you want just because it's not technically illegal. But I wasn't sure we'd cross the line into unacceptable behavior either. May as well try insisting that we'd done nothing wrong. And that is interesting because that kind of speaks to more of the Japanese mindset of things, because I am American, and America was founded on very individualist principles, and a lot of that attitude has survived into the modern day. Japan, on the other hand, is very collectivist, so they kind of have the other way around. In the United States, you kind of can do whatever you want as long as it's not technically illegal, and it's not on somebody else's property, because they can make their own rules for their own space and kick you out if you don't follow their rules. But aside from that, as long as you're not breaking the law, you can do kind of whatever you want. In Japan, there's kind of an unspoken social rules as well, not just the strict letter of the law. So I don't know which kind of direction the demon continent would actually take, but it is interesting to think of how, even in the real world, these different cultures have different attitudes towards things, because I could see it kind of going either way. Actually, in the demon continent, it seems to be, a little bit less strict as far as law and order goes, so you probably can just kind of do whatever you want, and they have bigger problems to deal with than just kind of technically than getting someone who's kind of skirting the rules a bit. Are you friggin' serious, kid? You ever thought about what happens if a bunch of other idiots start pulling that crap too? Not really. What would happen? Jobs would start getting sold to the highest bidder. The whole damn point of the guild would disappear. I could insist we weren't paying each other for our tasks, but that probably wouldn't fly, would it? Right. I guess you could technically classify this as a form of buying or selling guild tasks. This guy's smarter than he looks. To be sure, if our methods became more common, you'd probably start seeing some people selling off their jobs for an easy profit. For example, someone could just accept all the D-ranked jobs available at once, then sell them off piecemeal to the other D-ranked guys. The seller would get a steady flow of cash and eventually move up the ranks, all without lifting a finger himself. Of course, with that approach, you'd end up failing any jobs you couldn't manage to sell. I mean, that would be easily solved by just having a limit to the amount of jobs you can take, or maybe only being able to take like 1 or 2 jobs at a time. Or having a daily limit, something like that. That would be pretty easily solved at the guild leadership level. Why do you even care, Nokopada? We're not causing you any trouble, are we? You sure you want to take that tone with me, kid? You're standing at a bit of a crossroads right now, see? You listen up too, Jalil. At this point, Nokopada seized me by the front of my robe and lifted me up off the floor. Glancing behind me, I shook my head at Eris and Ruijerd, whose eyes were flashing with anger. Right now, I needed them to stay. This conversation wasn't over yet. Hee. It was hard to interpret Nokopada's expression, what with the whole horsehead thing, but I got the definite impression that he was leering at me. If you care about your status as an adventurer, you best start bringing me 2 iron coins per month. Oh wow, this was almost as refreshing, actually. I felt like this was the first time I'd met one of those types since I was reincarnated in this world. Everyone I'd run into lately was more of a Shades of Grey character, you know? It was kind of nice to get such a clear-cut bad guy for once. At least I wouldn't have to overthink the situation. And that is an interesting way to think about it, because let's not forget that Rudy's whole thing with the Mushoku Tensei world at first was that he interpreted it through the lens of video games and anime and manga and light novels and that kind of thing. So the fact that he actually gets to see somebody who actually meets the kind of character you'd meet in one of those types of media actually is probably kind of exciting for him. In any case, now I knew why Nokopada hung around the guild all day. He obviously kept a sharp eye out for adventurers who were up to no good, so he could squeeze cash out of them. Seemed like a nice, easy line of work. Couldn't I just report him for blackmail or something? No, that would mean exposing my own actions as well. You guys making good money these days, right? Ought to be no sweat. Do you mind if I ask a few questions? I said, doing my best to sound hopelessly flustered. Like what? I guess what we did would probably be classified as selling a job, right? Yeah, for sure. They'd slap you with a nice fat fee and rip up your card if they ever found out. Wouldn't like that, would ya? No, we don't want that. Stay calm. There isn't anything worth panicking over. I knew something like this might happen. We're okay. We're still okay. Okay. We just don't have that kind of cash on hand right now, so can Jaleel and I go turn in our jobs? Sure, whatever. Just don't make a run for it, alright? Wouldn't dream of it, Chief. This guy wasn't that smart after all, apparently. The two of us broke away and headed for the counter. Hey, what do we do? What are we gonna do, man? Calm down, Jaleel. You need to act like nothing's wrong. Having offered Jaleel those vague instructions, I signaled Viskel to come over and join us. We passed over our completed task cards and received our rewards. Before we left the counter, I also had them dissolve P Hunters and join Dead End. This step may or may not be meaningful. I wasn't sure how detailed the guild's records were. I looked back across the room and saw Ruijerd glaring at Nokapada with murder in his eyes. While we may have broken the guild's rules, it seemed Horseface's arrogant attempt at blackmail was a far graver violation of the Warrior's Code. With a small gesture, I signaled to Ruijerd to restrain himself. Eris didn't seem to understand what was going on. If she spoke the demon god tongue, she'd probably have been the first to attack that obnoxious horse, and she'd probably have used her sword, not her fists. As Jaleel and I rejoined the group, Nokapada slung his arms around our shoulders like we were old friends or something. Alright then, cough up your payment for this month, boys. With a forced smile on his face, Jaleel started to hand over the 2 iron coins he'd just received, but I grabbed his hand to stop him. Just one thing before we do that, and I will also note that this is once again kind of an example of Rudy being a little bit more confident because he kind of feels like he understands the flow of the conversation right now and he feels like he's in control. He feels like this is a scenario he's prepared for, he has a plan, he's in charge. Kind of like when he was walking in and getting everybody to laugh at him. Because he was directing the crowd, he got to kind of decide how things were going in that sense. Come on. Okay, there we go. What? Make it quick, kid. I got a real short fuse. I paused for just an instant to steady my nerves and say a silent little prayer. You do have some sort of proof that we broke the rules, right? Nokapada's irritated echoed across the lobby. Nokapada started off by pulling a list of tasks that Dead End had completed from the guild's record books. The clerk didn't ask him why he wanted this information. This probably wasn't the first time he'd asked for it. Apparently, we'd be using this information to pay a few visits to our previous clients. Oh, and don't get any funny ideas about attacking me in some back alley, said Nokapada, his eyes moving from Ruijerd to Jaleel. I felt like the rage on Ruijerd's face was pretty obvious, but Horseface didn't seem too irritated. Maybe he was used to getting glared at by men who wanted him dead. If I die, my pals will go straight to the guild to report ya. Oh, and unlike you phony C rankers, I'm the real deal. I could hit B rank anytime I felt like it. And again, that is very funny to me. Just because, I mean, we're operating on information that Nokapada doesn't have. It's even more so because I've already read the series. So I know that Rudy is, and the team, Rudy, Eris, and Ruijerd together are like easily S rank over time. Like they could get to S rank if they wanted to. I mean, they just took down an A rank monster together without really that much difficulty. So they could get to S rank if they really wanted to. So him saying he's C ranked but could get to B rank is kind of amusing to me because he's bragging about being worse than the crew. You had to assume the last part was just a bluff. Even Nokapada surely didn't believe that he could take us 1-on-5. He was driving us into a corner, yes, but that didn't mean he had a death wish. Still, this seemed somewhat careless of him. I would have taken at least one bodyguard along if I were in his shoes. Okay then, here we are. The first place we arrived at was an ordinary but unfamiliar house. Mickey, what are you doing? Sorry, my cat is being strange. What are you doing, Mickey? Here, girl. Oh, sorry about that. She was doing something a little weird, but I think she was just kind of sitting in a weird position. When Nokopada knocked on the front door, a cranky-looking old lady emerged. She had an eagle-like beak on her face and wore a plain black robe. A sugary sweet smell wafted from the inside of the house itself. No doubt we'd interrupted her in the middle of whipping up some Nerun. That's definitely a reference I don't understand, that I'm not catching. The old lady glared at us suspiciously at first, but once she noticed Viskel, her face lit up. Well now, if it isn't Viskel. What's all this, dear? You've brought me quite a crowd today. Oh, are these the other members of Dead End Ruijerd? Nokopada surveyed our startled faces, then looked back at the old lady, who clearly only recognized Viskel. He let out an amused grunt, a nasty smile spreading across his face. Sorry, lady, but they ain't Dead End. You got scammed. What? Glancing at Nokopada, the old lady snorted disdainfully. How exactly did I get scammed, huh? Well, Viskel cleared out those bugs just fine. Can't beat a Zumiba for this sort of thing, can you? I haven't seen one since. From the sound of things, Viskel had dealt with some sort of insect infestation here. Come to think of it, this old lady matched what we knew of one of the clients Ruijerd had observed her working for. And yeah, that was it was last week when we when we read that part of the book, but that is the task that Ruijerd recounted to Rudy. So long as you do the job quick and proper, I couldn't care less if you're the real Dead End. Nokopada wasn't the only one startled by that comment. Ruijerd's eyes went wide as well. Listen, lady. Hell, I'm an old woman. I don't have much time left either way. If I had a chance to meet a real super at the end, I'd take it every time. Nokopada's eyes darted around uncertainly for a moment, but then he turned forcefully to Viskel with a scowl. Viskel, let's see your adventurer card. Viskel started in surprise, but the small smile spread across her face. She took out her card and showed it off to everyone. The final line, of course, now read, Party, Dead End. What the... damn it, are you kidding me? At this point, P-Hunter no longer existed. An examination of the guild's records would probably have revealed why, and with a bit more work, evidence of our rule-breaking might have also emerged. But at least for now, this didn't seem to occur to Nokopada. To hell with this, we're going to the next one. With a small smirk on my face, I followed as he stomped off to the next address on his list. So I do kind of like this whole back and forth they're going. It's almost like a battle of wits where, they're both kind of trying to get, social leverage on one another. It's not a common thing at this point in the Mushoku Tensei story, so it is cool to see this dynamic playing out. It's almost like... I'm trying to think of a good example, but I can't off the top of my head, where, they're kind of, verbally jousting with one another. They can't directly call each other out for real, but, they're trying to slowly get leverage over the other. By the time we'd visited several dozen former clients, Nokopada's face had somehow gone from red to blue. Shit, what's going on here? Everyone we spoke to had the impression that Jalil and Viskel were members of Dead End all along. Their adventurer cards even backed up that story. There was even a feel-good moment near the very end where when we came to the girl who'd been our first ever client, she yelped with joy and hugged Ruijerd's leg. I'm sorry, Nokopada, but I don't think we can pay you if you can't produce any proof. God damn it. Forget paying. Maybe I'd report him to the guild. I could always accuse him of obstructing us from finishing our jobs or something. Hehehe. As I snickered evilly to myself, the final destination on Nokopada's list came into view. It was apparently the Wolfclaw Inn. It seemed Jalil had taken on some odd job in the place that we were staying. Bluffing our way through this might be harder if we had to deal with anyone who actually knew us, but it felt like we'd barely spoken with the innkeeper. We'd probably manage somehow. Here, they're the last ones. Two people emerged from the Wolfclaw Inn's front door. I froze at the sight of them. And one thing I do need to acknowledge before we get this scene started is Nokopada did say, hey, don't try to kill me because then you're backing yourself into a corner. I've got, the nuclear bomb. I got contingencies prepared, but there's nothing stopping them from just beating the shit out of him. They could do that and not kill him, and then just let him, heal up, and then say, or even directly heal him, because Rudy's got healing magic, and then just say, hey, fuck with us again, it'll happen again. And there's not really anything Nokopada could do about that. And I could kind of understand any of the individual characters not thinking of that in the moment, but it is a little difficult to realize, to accept that all of them didn't think about that. But it's a minor issue. I don't have very many problems with Mushoku Tensei early on in the story. Again, I've said this before, but most of my criticisms of the series are from the last third or so. But there are still a few minor things here and there that I might critique a little bit, and this is one of them. But it's very, very minor. This was not good. There were about 15 different alarm bells going off in my head. Emergency, emergency, red alert, air raid incoming, unanticipated contingency. All too late, I understood just how thoughtless and stupid I'd really been. Oh, Rudius, you're back. Good to see you, man. What's with all those people? We were face to face with the surviving members of the Tokurabu Village Toughs. There was deep exhaustion on Kurt's face, but he still greeted us in a friendly tone of voice. Hey there, kid. You remember who saved you in the petrified forest? That was Dead End, right? Ah, crap. I don't know if Nokopada had picked up on my panic, or if he'd planned to ask that question from the start, but either way, he had us now. Dead End's current party rank was D. The task P-Hunter had accepted was ranked B. In other words, we couldn't possibly have taken that job. Our story was about to fall apart. What? Kurt looked over at me and Rudius. Oh, Kurt looked over at me and Ruijerd, probably. That seems like a typo. I shook my head frantically, trying to tell him to keep his mouth shut. Come on, you're a proud kid. No one helped you. You got through that mess all by yourselves, right? If the kid would at least insist he had no idea what Nokopada was talking about, we still had a chance. I just had to pray his stubborn pride would come through for us. Meeting my desperate gaze, Kurt nodded decisively. Of course it was. I've never seen anyone as strong as these guys before. Oh my, what an honest boy. He proceeded to explain just how strong we really were, describing our defeat of the Executioner and the Almond Anacondas in a vigorous style that involved tons of sound effects, which is... I am kind of sad that the anime did not adapt that particular thing. I would have loved to hear the sound effects. Seriously, Rudius is freaking crazy. Those execs are hella scary, no doubt. But that one should have never got on Dead End's bad side. This was a one-on-one, right? Exec versus Rudius. How do you think that went? Boom, splat. It was over in one shot, man. One shot. Oh, and Ruijerd's unbelievable too. He was just like, whoosh, and then kablam. There go the anacondas. He was doing all this ridiculous stuff without even batting an eye. Seriously, I got goosebumps. Nokopada listened to the entire story with a great big grin on his face, talking in the occasional, wow, ain't that something, or no kidding. When Kurt finally ran out of steam, he turned back to us. Well, that's awful weird. Didn't you guys take a job around the city? Why were you off in the forest saving kids from monsters? Well, we just tagged along with Jalil on that one. Sorry, but Jalil and Viskel were in the city the whole time. It was over. No point pretending anymore. Nokopada had obviously figured out how to use this to drive our backs against the wall. Calm down. You still got a chance here. Focus, man. For now, we need some options to choose from. Let's say 3. Alright. Here we go. And before we get into that, I just do need to say, I get why this whole scene exists. I get why this whole dynamic exists. It's an important part of the story, and it is an interesting part overall. But it is kind of interesting how Nokopada, who's kind of like a low-level extortionist, he's not really doing any high-scoring takes, basically. So, but it's interesting how he decides to go up against Dead End, because as much as he does feel like he has the advantage here, there's always the factor that if he pushes too hard to the point where they say, fuck it, it's not worth dealing with this guy, even if there's going to be negatives to killing him, he couldn't really stop them from killing him, because he knows they're strong because the 3 of them took out a Red Hood Cobra. So he should have no illusions about being able to defend himself if they decide to turn on him. So I feel like this is almost a risk he wouldn't necessarily take. 1. Kill Nokopada. If he really did have a bunch of co-conspirators like he claimed, this plan would end very badly. But there was also a chance it might go off smoothly. It was a total dice roll, in other words. Bad idea. 2. Blame Jalil for everything. We were newbies, and Jalil was a veteran. If I started screaming that he tricked us into it and took advantage of us, we might slip off the hook. Nah, not happening. However, trying this one would cost me Ruijerd's friendship. Betraying our comrades would just be wrong after all. Another bad idea. 3. Cough up the money Mal and find a way out later. This was another dice roll. I might find some way to resolve things quickly, but now that Nokopada knew we were dangerous, he'd probably set up a multi-layered scheme to keep us trapped in the city and safely in his gang's clutches. Another bad idea. Well, now I had 3 terrible plans to pick from. That was clearly time well spent. What the hell was I gonna do? The single simplest way out was Plan 2, but it was probably the worst choice by a long shot. Whatever its immediate benefits, we'd be crippling ourselves in the long run. Betraying Jalil and Viskel would mean losing Ruijerd's trust for good. He'd probably never listen to a word I spoke ever again. Plan 2 was off the table. Absolutely off the table. Plan 1 was no good either. It was just senseless. I'd derail myself completely off the path I've been following up until today. It didn't matter how casually people viewed death on Demon Continent, that wasn't even the issue here. If I killed Nokapata now just to get myself out of trouble, I'd start solving all my problems the same way. I wasn't ready to commit to murdering my way through my life. And also, this is another example of Rudy kind of rationalizing his morality. He's still not quite at the point of doing the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing, but he knows that killing is wrong. He does not like killing. He does not like death. It's something he's very averse to, and it's something he will much later in the stories have to come to grips with, the idea of killing and intentionally. But he's still at the point where he doesn't want to kill, but he doesn't realize why he doesn't want to kill, so he has to explain to himself why he doesn't want to kill Nokapata, even though realistically killing him is probably the most pragmatic solution here. Plan 3 wasn't any better, though. By handing money over to these people, we'd be admitting our own guilt. That was the last thing I wanted to do. There was also the real possibility we'd end up breaking our other rules, or even laws, as they were squeezing cash out of us. That would give Nokapata more leverage over us. His demands would likely escalate. He might even try to get his grubby hands on Eris. I knew I would if I were him. If it came to that, we'd be forced to kill him after all. But even so, it basically had to be Plan 3, right? And I also do really like how he's basically like doing an internal spiral at the moment, where he's just kind of going around in circles in his mind and just kind of talking to himself. There's a really good way of representing the fact that he's like kind of freaking out and that his mind is going a mile a minute. Where was I? No, compared to going down that road, we may as well pick Plan 1 from the start. We just have to kill Nokapata, and all his friends too. Was that just my only option here? Was I really going to do this? Did I have to? I honestly didn't know if I could bring myself to murder someone. And how were we going to deal with the rest of his gang, wherever they were? Maybe Ruijerd should track them down somehow, but how? If he didn't even know who he was looking for, that third eye of his probably wouldn't do us much good. There was always the option of just giving up on the adventurer thing. We could find ways to survive even without the guild. I had a decent sense for the ways we could earn money on this continent by now. Still, let's say I made that call, painful as it may be. What would happen to Jalil and Viskel? Not only had they participated in our scheme, the guild's investigation might turn up evidence of their pet abduction business. Our party had some money saved up and no particular attachment to the city, but the two of them were different. This was their home. They might end up getting driven out of it. These two didn't have the skills to survive out in the wilderness. Wouldn't be abandoning them be just another kind of betrayal? Could we take them in after they were banished? No, not a chance. It would be hard enough dealing with our own problems. We couldn't possibly take care of them as well. I mean, we again, that's kind of Rudy rationalizing his morality. He knows that it would be wrong to fuck them over. But he's convincing himself that it would be impractical to take them on, even though, realistically, if it really came down to the wire, they could have them join up and, have a reasonable short-term solution there. Okay, to hell with this. I need to steel myself. I'll become a killer if I have to. Remember the goal. I have to get Eris back home safe no matter what. To make that happen, I'm willing to betray both Jalil and Ruijerd. I don't care if Eris ends up hating me. I don't care if I can never look Paul or Roxy in the eye again. I'll flood this whole damn city with a Saint-Tier spell. Eris and I can make a run for it. And in the confusion, let them take away my status as an adventurer if they want to. I'm going to reach my goal no matter how low I have to sink. Just you watch. And that's also one of the first notable examples of Rudy actually being willing to undergo a real sacrifice for the sake of another person, because Eris is somebody he's grown to really care about over the past couple of years of, growing up alongside her, teaching her, learning from her, and, training and living together. He's like, I'm willing to fuck up everything in my life. I'm even willing to lose her for her own sake. That's like a huge deal. I think it was kind of a mistake that the anime did not include this moment, because I think it is a really pivotal moment in Rudy's character development. Like the idea that Rudy is willing to throw everything away for someone he cares about. With my mind made up at last, I began gathering magical energy in my hands, then noticed the look on Nokopata's face. What? Ah, he'd gone white as a sheet all of a sudden, and his knees were trembling. He wasn't looking at me, though. He was staring at something behind me. I turned around, and Ruijerd was standing there, looking very wet. A water jug I'd noticed out behind the inn lay on the ground next to him. Ruijerd? His hair shone emerald green in the sunlight. It was soaking wet. He dumped the water over his head and washed out the blue dye. He'd also undone his headband to expose the red jewel on his forehead, which is this is a little different than how the anime did it, because the anime had Rudy start, had the rain actually start, and if I'm remembering correctly, it was the rain that actually got Ruijerd to wash his dye out of the hair, as opposed to him directly just doing it to expose himself. He's supered. Nokopata had fallen backwards, landing on his bottom. I am Ruijerd Superdia, also known as Dead End. It appears my identity has been exposed. I suppose I'll have to kill you all now. Ruijerd delivered his line in a stiff, unnatural monotone. The man really wasn't cut out to be an actor. Still, the rage in his eyes was real. Ah! Someone let out an ear-piercing shriek, and suddenly, everyone on the street was screaming, girls, young men, and old people alike. They dropped whatever they were carrying and ran for their lives. As the chaos spread, Jalil was the first to betray us, shouting, "They threatened me! I don't know anything! I'm not on their side!" He turned and ran, taking Viskel with him. Kurt's legs had given out under him. Maybe he was remembering how sharply he'd spoken to Ruijerd the other day. His face was deathly pale, and it looked like he was pissing himself. Why were they so terrified all of a sudden? It was still Ruijerd. His hair color had just changed, that's all. I couldn't begin to understand it. You guys were acting normally up until now, right? Come on, Kurt. You were just talking up Ruijerd like he was some sort of superhero. You said you wanted to be like him someday, remember? You were looking at him with respect in your eyes. So why? Why are you so afraid of him now that his hair is green? Look at Eris, man. She doesn't have any idea what's going on, but she's staying calm, right? She's standing there with her arms folded, her feet wide apart, and her chin in the air. Again, just the anime got that pose perfect. Quietly watching all this with her eyes wide open. So why is everyone else freaking out? Many of the people around us were fleeing in a blind panic. Others were sitting in the street. A few had drawn their weapons, although their legs were wobbling. There had been many different types of people in the area, but they were all trembling now. All this because of one guy with green hair? And I do think this scene is important because we're seeing Rudy really get to see firsthand the bigotry of the Super against a Super, because it's not something that's been seen before. It's something that's been explained, and we saw Eris's reaction to Ruijerd, but we never really got the full grasp of what it means to be a Super in this world. I knew the people here feared Dead End. I didn't know they feared him this much. I didn't know how visceral their terror was. Ha! It made me kind of want to laugh. What was the point of all my plans and scheming anyway? They took one look at his real hair color, and this is what we got. Did I really think my little PR plan was going to change a thing? How ridiculous. Maybe I assumed everyone would come to understand him, the way Eris and the Migard did. But that was never going to be possible. This wasn't a question of countering a few ugly rumors. For these people, the Super were terror personified, and I wanted to change that? What a joke. It was hopeless from the start. As all hell broke loose around him, Ruijerd slowly walked up to Nokopata. You there. Your name was Nokopata, wasn't it? Grabbing the horseman by the neck, he pulled him up off the ground. Nokopata's body looked heavy, but Ruijerd lifted him effortlessly. Ruijerd, don't kill him. Even now that it had come to this, I found myself shouting out a warning. If he killed Nokopata under these circumstances, with everyone watching, the name Dead End would be tainted forever. Honestly though, wasn't it already? Was there any point to holding back now? Nope, not really. Forget it. Go get him, Berserker. I'm sorry. I had no idea you were the real deal. Please don't kill me. Please. Ruijerd's face was full of rage. Nokopata was shaking like a leaf. Hey, what the heck is going on? Hissed Eris, sounding a bit unnerved. We're in the middle of a worst-case scenario, I responded slowly. So why aren't you doing anything about it? Because there's nothing I can do. Sorry. Well, I guess we're really out of luck then. And I also do really like this little moment between Eris and Rudy. It's like, it's a small thing, but it's actually very significant. The idea that Eris was kind of defiant, being like, what the fuck, things are going badly, why aren't you fixing it? And then he's like, I can't, there's nothing to do at the moment. And she immediately says, you know what, I trust him. If he says there's nothing he can do, then there is nothing he can do. She just accepts it without like any pushback whatsoever, which I don't think she would do for anyone else except maybe Ghislaine and Soros. The girl gave up quickly enough. In her defense, I'd already done the same a while ago. There was no fixing this mess, and it was all my fault. I'd assumed we could always figure something out, even if somebody else caught on. I'd let myself believe we could improvise our way through any unexpected trouble, and this disaster was the result. Now that events had come this far, the only real way I could intervene would be to carry out my original idea and wash the slate clean, like with a magic tidal wave. Good one, right? Ha ha ha. Please, you gotta have mercy. I got 7 hungry kids at home. Nobupada pleaded for his life in a somewhat incoherent fashion. It was fairly obvious those kids didn't exist. Even I could have managed to come up with something more convincing. I'm leaving this city, and you are going to forget you ever met me. Still, Ruijerd let him off the hook right away. I suppose the reference to children was probably a factor there. Right. Thank you so much. Relief washed over Nokapada's face, for an instant at least. However, you had better hope that our status as adventurers hasn't been revoked by the time we reach the next town. Ruijerd jabbed his trident forward and sliced a shallow cut across Nokapada's cheek. A wet stain spread across the front of the horseman's pants, and something bulged out of the rear. Don't assume you're safe within this city's walls. Nobupada nodded vigorously and repeatedly. When Ruijerd dropped him, he hit the ground with a nasty squelch. And again, I do think that kind of shows that, as I was saying earlier, Nobupada, he's intimidating, but he's ultimately just kind of a low-level bully who doesn't really have that much power backing him up. And I imagine Rudy, probably has mixed feelings, but, this is kind of the first time he saw somebody really stand up to a significant bully who was causing real problems and have it just go so very poorly for the bully. And, Rudy's whole thing is that he hates bullies. Before long, Ruijerd was chased out of Rikurisu. Taking all the blame for everything on his shoulders, he fled to the wilderness. That was an ugly, frustrating day. Ruijerd set off running all by himself, leaving us behind. Soon enough, the guardsmen ran up to ask everyone what happened, and I insisted Ruijerd had done nothing wrong. But in their eyes, of course, I was just a child. They decided he must have intimidated me into saying that. Before long, everyone arrived at the conclusion that Ruijerd had been planning out some evil plot here, using us as his pawns. The details of his scheme were unclear, but at least he'd never gotten the chance to carry it out. Everyone around us looked at me and Eris with pity in their eyes. They were convinced we were naive children who'd been manipulated by a vicious devil. I was so angry I could have punched someone. What exactly had Ruijerd done wrong anyway? All of this was my fault. None of it would have happened if I hadn't gotten so damn complacent. Eris and I returned to the Wolfclaw Inn, gathered up our few possessions, and left it for good. We needed to hurry. Ruijerd might wander off somewhere. It wasn't like we could stick around in this city ourselves anyway. Nobupada was still alive, as were his supposed allies. And the fact remained that we'd broken the guild's rules. Once things calmed down a little, we'd be boxed in again, and without Ruijerd to rely on. Which is actually an interesting way of thinking about things, because while Ruijerd at this point in the story is definitely the strongest combatant by a wide margin, of the group at least, honestly, Eris and Rudy together would be a force to be reckoned with. Like, it would not be easy to overtake them, because Eris is like officially advanced rank, probably bordering on Saint. Like, not quite there yet, but in that direction. And Rudy is Saint tier in water magic, advanced in the rest, and also his silent casting, he's very good at that. So, I don't know, they probably don't need Ruijerd for their own protection, but that's not how Rudy thinks. Hey, Rudius. As we were walking out of the inn, Kurt approached us with an uncertain expression on his face. I don't know what to say to him, honestly. I didn't know what to say to him, honestly. Why the heck were you guys traveling with that monster? Don't call him a monster. You remember who saved you in that forest, right? Where do you get off pissing your pants at the sight of him? Well, that's true, I guess. My bad. Okay, there's no point taking it out on Kurt. He was trying to help us back there. Sorry, Kurt. That wasn't fair. Nah, it's fine. It's not like you were wrong. I actually do like this. Like, we don't get to a whole lot with Kurt specifically. I mean, there's the other Tokarabu toughs, but Kurt is the only one who really gets a significant feature as an individual. But I like how there's like a lot of character development. There's like a full arc for him in the very short amount of time we met him, because he got completely humbled by the Cobra, and now he like almost kind of reevaluates the way he approaches everything, and he's very willing to admit when he's wrong now. Like he completely, his ego got completely shattered, and he's like become more mature as a result. So, I mean, while it's obviously not good to have gone through significant trauma like he did, he seems to have benefited from it. He really was a good kid, although Eris was still glaring at him with her hands clenched at her sides. I've got a favor to ask. I want you to pay us back for saving your life. Okay, Kurt said, his expression growing more serious. What do you need? Ruijerd really isn't a bad person. People are afraid of him because of things that happened a long time ago, but he's a good guy. I want you to spread that around the city even after we leave. Right, got it. I guess I do owe him my life after all. The kid didn't sound entirely convinced. Oh well, he seemed like an earnest type. Maybe he'd actually keep his promise. I stopped by the Adventurers Guild and removed Jalil and Viskel from Dead End. I also asked the clerk to pass on a brief message to them. Sorry it came to this, but thanks for all your help. You've got his gratitude as well. Those two did betray us at the very end, but you could hardly blame them for that. It was the only option they had to save themselves. Putting aside how things had ended, they definitely helped us out a great deal, and I do actually really like how he is completely sympathetic to them betraying him, even though he was completely rejecting the idea of him betraying them, ostensibly because he didn't want to get Ruijerd angry, but really because he knew it would be wrong. But he's actually giving them a lot more grace than he gave himself. On our way to the gate out of town, I stopped to buy a lizard-like reptile trained to carry people and luggage. It was a large creature with 6 legs and charmingly bulgy eyes. On this continent, they were basically used in place of horse-drawn carriages. This particular species could easily accommodate 2 adult riders at once. It cost us 10 iron coins, about half of all our money on hand, but I decided some time ago that I was going to buy one of these when we hit the road again. Having one supposedly made it much, much easier to navigate the Demon Continent. And yeah, I mean, having a beast of burden is usually a good idea, like in these types of settings. Like, it really does make travel a lot easier when vehicles aren't really an option, especially in terrain as harsh as the Demon Continent. Which, from my understanding, it's not like they're walking along the roads. They're a creature that is adapted to rough, uneven terrain is probably a good choice for. Better than walking on foot, at least. Although there's always the cost of feeding it. But, it's like how in medieval times in real life, how, buying a horse would be expensive, but it would be a good investment if you were traveling a lot. After a brief tutorial from the merchant on how to control the thing, I loaded up with our bags and we headed out of Rikurisu. There were a large number of soldiers gathered around the gate. Maybe they were preparing to try and chase down Ruijerd or something. Their faces were pale, but their expressions were excited. When I stopped by to say hello, they warned us to be careful out there, since Dead End had fled the city not long ago. From that point, they proceeded to emphasize that Dead End was a bloodthirsty devil, and speculated about what evil deeds he'd been getting up to inside the city. Not that they'd ever even seen him. After a while, I couldn't bite my tongue anymore. That man was in the city for nearly 2 months, and he didn't cause any trouble at all. The guards looked at me like I'd grown a second head. I glared at them, clicked my tongue in irritation, and finally walked out of the city. I was in a truly foul mood. Right now, we needed to meet up with Ruijerd. Was he still somewhere nearby? I had to assume so. If his pride as a warrior was still intact, there was no way he'd abandon us. Or Eris, at least. And I do find one thing I do find interesting that I might have to really sit and think about a little bit, because I haven't fully formed my thoughts on this matter. But I do find it interesting how people inside and outside the Demon Continent deal with Ruijerd, because people inside the Demon Continent have a direct historical connection to what Ruijerd did back in the Laplace War, where it was their ancestors that he had massacred or attacked, or who had been in the area when he was doing his thing. So there's a connection between them there. Whereas when Ruijerd actually goes outside of the Demon Continent and he's, traveling around the I don't remember if it was Asura or if it was Millis. It was probably Asura after he split up from Rudy and Eris. You know, he would go and meet people and he would explain that, yeah, he's a super. And he's like, oh, I'd always heard you guys were monsters. I guess that was just a silly fairy tale. Because these people grew up outside of the bubble of people who would understand kind of what it meant to have been associated with the super at some point. So it is interesting so that the people outside the demon continent are a little bit more accepting. I'm gonna have to really think about kind of how that all plays out, because I think there's actually some interesting stuff there. I just don't remember the later parts of the story well enough to really kind of have a solid idea of what I'm thinking. I guess this should be far enough. Once the city was completely out of sight, I sent a magic firework into the sky. It burst into the air with a ferocious boom, producing a flash of light and a wave of heat. We waited for a while, but Ruiger didn't appear. Eris, can you call for him as well? Eris shouted out Ruiger's name at the top of her lungs, which was incidentally pretty loud. This time, something did appear after a while, but it was a group of Pax coyotes. I took out my irritation on them. Soon enough, the rocky area we were standing in was transformed into a perfectly flat plateau, and the monsters were reduced to bloody chunks. Could they still come back as zombies, even from this state? Not my problem. The city can deal with it. Look, it's Ruigerd. Not long after the battle ended, our wayward super finally made an appearance. There was a guilty look on his face. That just made me feel even worse. Why didn't you show up when we called for you? Were you planning to run off somewhere without a word to us? Yet for some reason, the first words that came out of my mouth were accusatory. That wasn't what I wanted to say at all. I'm sorry, Ruigerd led with an apology. Awkward. This whole mess was obviously my fault. I got cocky and careless. I made the call to team up with Jalil and Viskel because I wanted a quicker and easier way forward. When Nokapata threatened us, I just assumed we managed to wriggle our way out of it. But when we got backed up against the wall and Ruigerd had to clean up my mess for me, if he hadn't made himself the scapegoat, we may have gotten trapped in that city for good. I couldn't even blame bad luck for the way things went. Nokapata was a pro at blackmail. He would have cornered us somehow, even if Kurt hadn't given us away. For what? I'm the one who owes you an apology. I felt like such a piece of crap. No, you did everything you could, Rudius. But even the best-laid battle plans go awry. I know how thoroughly you thought about every detail, every step we took, day in and day out. Suddenly, Ruigerd smiled and placed his hand gently on my head. I didn't know what you were thinking, of course, and I'll admit that until today I suspected your goals to be immoral. For that reason, there were times I could barely abide your decisions. He paused to glance over at Eris, then nodded to himself. But now I understand that you were simply desperate to protect something no matter what the cost. I saw that in your eyes just now, when you were ready to kill that man. Just now? Oh, when I was about to flood the city. You fight to protect something, Rudius, and that makes you a warrior. When Ruigerd spoke those words, I actually had to fight back tears. I didn't deserve that sort of praise. I was a shallow, short-sighted person. All I ever thought about was making money and finding ways to get ahead. I'd even been ready to abandon Ruigerd himself. I nearly cast aside the one ally we could rely upon until the bitter end. And also, it's interesting because Ruigerd is, identifying something real, and Rudy doesn't even realize that it's real because, if you remember the little paragraph that Rudy gave right before Ruigerd washed his hair dye away, he literally said he was willing to, sacrifice his ability to be an adventurer. He was willing to be a pariah. He was willing to lose Ruigerd. He was willing to betray Viskel and Jalil, and he was willing to make Eris hate him if it meant that he could get her home safely. So he was willing to sacrifice absolutely everything. Ruigerd saw that in him, and Rudy doesn't even realize that's what happened. Ruigerd, I wanted to be honest with him. I wanted to tell him something, in my own words, plain and simple, without hiding behind superficial politeness, even if I didn't know exactly what that something was. Don't say anything, but he cut me off before I could. From this point on, put your goals ahead of mine. Huh? Don't worry. I'll protect the two of you, even if you don't improve my reputation. Trust me. Please. I did trust him. Of course I trusted him. Which meant we didn't have to help him anymore. It made sense. Spreading the word about Ruijerd was no easy task, and trying to pursue two goals at once made it difficult to really focus on either. We may have been stretching ourselves too thin. I've been under so much stress lately, at least. I'd overlooked some things that should have occurred to me, and failed to think through a number of important details. A situation like that can easily lead to disasters like the one we just experienced. And so, we didn't have to help Ruijerd anymore. But I couldn't accept that. Not after seeing what I'd just seen. Not after watching everyone basically chase him out of town with pitchforks. I couldn't bring myself to say, alright then, just wait outside next time we reach a city. I can't do that, Ruijerd. I'll fix your reputation no matter what. If anything, his offer only made my determination stronger. I owed him at least this much for everything he'd done. I was just gonna have to do a better job from now on. I wasn't going to push myself past my limits again, but I'd still do everything I could. Haven't you learned your lesson, Rudius? Am I really so untrustworthy? I do trust you. That's why I want to help you reach your goal. I was bullied myself back in the day. People slapped a label on me, one that I never managed to remove, and I suffered for it. I'd spent decades by myself. If Roxy hadn't dragged me outside, I might never have escaped that isolation. I might never have even met Sylphie or Eris. Ruijerd was a more complicated case, of course, and the scale of his problem was incomparable to mine. But that was no reason for me to give up on him. Roxy had helped me without even meaning to, but I wasn't Roxy. I'd have to keep trying, keep screwing up, and slowly crawl my way forward through the mud. It may be a total nuisance from Ruijerd's perspective. There may be more disasters like this in store, when he'd have to clean up my mess for me. But that was fine by me. I'd rather fail than not even try. That line right there, that is like such a turning point for Rudy, where that is a complete 180 from his old position. That is like a huge growth moment. And while I think this scene was done very well in the anime, I really liked this scene in the anime. That is an important note that I think was kind of missing, where they really focused on the agreement and the kind of bond between Rudy and Ruijerd, kind of ignoring the idea that Rudy said, you know what? I'm going to push forward no matter what, even if it doesn't look like I'm going to succeed. Whereas, his past life, his whole thing was that he locked himself inside his room and preferred not to try it. Never try, never fail, that kind of thing. You're certainly a stubborn one. You're one to talk, Ruijerd. All right, then. Let's do what we can, I suppose. With a wry smile, Ruijerd nodded slightly. For some reason, in that moment, I felt like I'd finally earned his trust for good. When I woke up the next morning, Ruijerd was as bald as a cue ball. The sight left me dumbfounded. Also a little freaked out, honestly. In combination with that scar on his face, it made him look like a Yakuza. What happened yesterday made it clear my hair frightens people, so I got rid of it. That must have taken real resolve. Back in Japan, shaving yourself bald was a way of expressing single-minded determination, or showing remorse for some huge mistake. Things were different in this world, of course, but even so, seeing Ruijerd like this, I sort of felt like I should follow his example. But also it's kind of a repeat of what I mentioned earlier, where that's a Japanese thing, not really a thing much outside of Japan, because, being bald here in the US is just being bald. Like, I got a coworker who's bald, not because he has any kind of thing he's working through, just because he happens to be bald. And I'm also personally an advocate of, when your hair is starting to go, when you're starting to bald, just go the whole distance. Don't settle for the laurel wreath of hair. Just shave the whole thing off. The best way to atone is through action, after all. Do I really want to shave myself bald too? I mean, I did screw up here, right? But man, I don't know. Eris, you think I should do that too? Don't you dare. I like your hair the way it is, Rudius. Yeah, okay. So I ended up using Eris to get myself off the hook. Go on, laugh at me. I deserve it. And I really like that last line as a way of kind of capping this part of the story off, because he just, it was a heavy scene, a heavy series of scenes so far, and there wasn't a whole lot of humor, actually, compared to normal, because, again, really did have occasional little jokes, little references, like he always does, but it was pretty devoid of that recently. And, of course, he had another great monologue in this previous page here, which is, another thing I like about Mushoku Tensei. But, it kind of set a tone. Now that this part of the story's kind of done what it needs to do, then it's kind of cutting off that tension that has been building up. Even though it came to a satisfying resolution, just a little bit of self-deprecating humor is the kind of breaks the tension and makes it a little more lighthearted again. All right, come on. Yeah. It's taking its time. Okay, there we go. Chapter 14. The beginning of our journey. For me, as a member of the Dragon Quest generation, the words Demon Continent naturally bring to mind the concept of a demon realm. You know, a dark land ruled over by an all-powerful demon king, with small villages populated by monsters, long-forgotten ancient shrines, and fearsome creatures swaggering around all over the place. I will say that is one thing that I've never played. I've never played any Dragon Quest games. I do want to. Eventually I will, but... So I'm not quite getting the references. I mean, of course, I know of Dragon Quest. I know some of the visuals that are accompanying it, but I just don't have that experience. It wasn't really like that in this world, though. For one thing, that all-powerful Demon King was nowhere to be found. Which isn't to say that Demon Kings didn't exist. In fact, there were roughly 30 of them at the moment, and they all had at least a bit of territory to lord over. But they weren't rulers, really. They just called themselves kings and acted as like they owned the neighborhood. Each Demon King did have something like a guard squad or a band of knights, typically with impressive-sounding names. The soldiers in Rikarisu technically belonged to one of these. They complemented the activities of adventurers by exterminating dangerous monsters in the area, capturing criminals in town, and otherwise taking independent action to protect their homes. More of a city watch or local militia than an army, really. Yeah, it's basically, Demon Continent is a bit of a feudal system, a loose feudal system. But the Demon Kings are generally pretty eccentric. They kind of do their own thing. So it's not as formalized as a feudal system would be in the real world, where they're constantly vying for political power. They're just kind of content to do their own thing, which is a dynamic I would have liked to see more of in the anime, because I think it's actually a pretty cool way of doing a geopolitical structure. I wasn't clear on the exact relationship between the local Demon King and those guys. Did he actually issue them orders, or were they just calling themselves his soldiers? They'd presumably be his army if he ever went to war, so I guess there was some sort of contract in place. At the moment, no one was fighting any wars, and things were relatively peaceful. But that only applied when you were in the neighborhood of a specific Demon King. The majority of the Demon Continent was completely lawless. Things may be calm around Southern Cross and the Holy Emperor's Mausoleum, but everything in between was rampant with mohawk-sporting biker gangs, basically. In any case, the Demon King who controlled the area around Rikarisu was named Badigadi, and we're gonna see him later. I love that they're bringing him up early on, because just seeing that name again, he's a lot of fun. And I also do point out that he seems to be loosely based off of the Kichukwo Ranch version of Ragnarok Arc Super Gandhi, not the canon version of that character. So, and that was also a really fun character, so I like him even more for that. He was said to be a muscular macho guy with 6 arms and black skin. At the moment, however, he'd set off on an aimless journey, and no one had any idea where he was. Sounded like something of a free spirit. Which does seem to be a kind of common thing among Demon Kings, at least the ones we've met. There's Badigadi, there's Atofu Atofi, and then there's Kishiriko, although Kishiriko is the Demon Emperor, but, same kind of deal there. They all seem to be kind of just eccentric, doing their own thing, completely different outlook on life. At any rate, the Demon Continent was crawling with powerful creatures. There was a reason the Adventurers Guild put all the monster-slaying jobs at rank C or higher. Basically, every monster you could find here was at least that tough. Stone Treants were maybe just barely D-ranked. That said, demon folk were generally stronger than humans. They were also very good in group combat, as the unique abilities of the various sub-races helped them play specific roles. Hitting rank B was still a real challenge for most people, but the adventurers who got there were stronger than the B rankers you'd find elsewhere. Those who couldn't get that far usually ended up like Nokapada or Jalil. The more I thought about it, the more incredible Ruijerd seemed. The man said he could take down A-ranked monsters single-handedly, and I believed him. All by himself, he was stronger than a group of 6 or 7 skilled B-ranked adventurers. And that just is another little bit of While we never get a super strict level of power scaling, it does seem like there's a bit of an exponential curve as you go up in any kind of capacity, whether it's magic or swordplay or adventuring. You had to be pretty happy about earning the trust of someone like that, right? 3 days had passed since we left the city of Rikarisu. I'm not sure if it had anything to do with the fact that I was feeling a bit more relaxed after winning over Ruijerd, but my appetite was growing increasingly ferocious. Mickey, what are you doing? Why are you scratching my chair? If you want to hang out with me, you can. I have this little seat right next to me for a reason, but I would appreciate it if you didn't try to destroy my chair. You have a scratching post not 3 feet away. Sorry about that. The problem was, we didn't have anything good to work with. We were mostly living off great tortoise meat, and great tortoise meat wasn't my idea of a good time. I decided to try and improve our culinary situation slightly. The stuff was gross when you roasted it, so we may as well try a different method. Using magic, I whipped up a large clay pot, a basic but powerful cooking stove, and some delicious Grey Rat family artisanal water. It was everything we needed to make a basic stew. Water was a precious resource around here, but I could produce it in unlimited quantities. Initially, I wanted to use a pressure cooker to get the meat really nice and tender, but the first one I tried to make very nearly exploded, so I decided not to pursue that idea. Yeah, that just seems like a dangerous thing. Well, pressure cookers are just an incredible thing. Like, they really are like powerful cooking implements. There's a reason that they are like the kitchen appliance of choice if you are going to do a terrorist act. So yeah, not knowing how to do it, I wouldn't risk it. Cooking the meat this way did take significantly longer, but we didn't have gas or water bills to worry about. I was willing to watch lovingly over that simmering pot for hours if I had to. It was particularly convenient that I could make all the cookware we needed using earth magic, making it disposable. And there's also the fact that you probably would have to babysit the pot because you know, with an open fire, you can't control heat as easily like you can on on an actual stove. So he would have to kind of manually manage the heat. One of these days, I wanted to give smoking the meat a try as well, but stone treant chips probably wouldn't imbue it with too pleasant a flavor. Stewing the great tortoise meat did make it somewhat more edible. Instead of chewing on nasty tough meat, we now had nasty tender meat. Yeah, it was still nasty. You couldn't simmer that pungent aroma out of it, and the flavor was what it was. It was weird, honestly. I could have sworn this stuff tasted much better back at that Migard village. Were we missing something? After a moment's thought, it finally dawned on me. It must have been those plants they were growing inside the village. I thought they were half-dead vegetable crops, but that wasn't the case. That plant was probably some sort of herb or spice, something they used to hide the stench of their meat and improve its flavor. I'd been totally misled by Roxy's description of them as bitter and unpleasant. They were used for seasoning. You weren't supposed to eat them on their own. And yeah, that is also a factor where, sometimes, depending on what you cook things with, balancing out flavors is a way of doing things, because, they never really explain what exactly the great tortoise meat tastes like, but I imagine they would find some way to counteract the taste if it is actually as bad as Rudy is making it sound. Good grief, my master could be such a blockhead sometimes. I made a mental note to try to buy some spices of that kind if there were any available in this next city we visited. I wanted to pick up some other ingredients as well, just for variety's sake, but maybe it would be a waste of money. Food tended to be expensive on this continent. Vegetables were particularly pricey since the region was inhospitable to plant life. You could buy 5 kilograms of meat for the cost of something that resembled a scraggly ginseng root, which is actually very interesting. For most of history, it's kind of the opposite, where meat tends to be more expensive than vegetables, just because produce is something that could be made consistently, didn't require as much ongoing maintenance or food. Like you didn't really need food. So that, produce was always a lot cheaper. And it is interesting because the different types of meat was differently priced as well for various reasons. For example, as much as it's very interesting because nowadays chicken is kind of the cheapest meat you can get, like, easily. chicken used to be the most expensive out there. Not the most expensive, but more expensive than other stuff, because if something like a pig, you could just feed it garbage basically, and a cow would eat grass, which humans can't. Well, humans can eat it, but we can't digest it. So they would kind of eat stuff that was not edible by humans, whereas chickens would eat like grain and stuff. So you would waste actual human food feeding the chickens. So that's why chickens were more expensive. Until nowadays, chickens are kind of easier to mass produce. So they're cheap now. Great tortoise meat was cheap. It was the staple food around here, more or less. Those things were larger than a 5-ton truck, so killing one would get you enough meat to keep a family sated for quite a while. Of course, you couldn't feed an entire city that way. Sometimes people ate pax coyotes, or even the larvae of insects that lived inside of treants. Brave as she was, Eris hadn't been too interested in trying the latter. That is also another thing where, and I know Mushoku Tensei doesn't go into it a lot, but a lot of cultures around the world have eaten bugs as a consistent source of protein. Like, apparently locusts taste pretty good if they're cooked. And I was, the last time we had a big cicada swarm around here, I was tempted to try to cook some of them and see if I could eat them, but I didn't have I couldn't work up the nerve to do it. Next time, maybe. Not that I felt any differently. The culinary culture of this continent wasn't exactly to my liking. Depending on how you cooked it, great tortoise meat could at least be edible. By the standards of Demon Continent fare, it was probably on the tasty side. I could just barely understand where Ruijerd was coming from when he called it delicious. Still, I really needed to get my hands on some seasoning. Eris and Ruijerd seemed content to eat their meat plain, though. In other words, I'd be making the call to buy the spices all by myself. That wasn't good. We were a team, after all. We probably needed to get into the habit of taking our decisions over as a group, and I actually do really like this as well, because this is kind of the first little note of Rudy's kind of long-term soft obsession with food, where food would be like a really big deal to him, where every time he would get a chance to experience some really good food, he would get really excited, which will lead to the really funny moment with the death god. Although we won't know it's the death god at the time, where he's cooking the chicken and Rudy just crashes out over that. Or later on, like late in the series, when he finds out how to make egg on rice. And actually, that scene was so funny, and he was so gushing over egg on rice, that actually convinced me to try it myself for the first time. And it was kind of mid. Like, it wasn't bad, but, like, I didn't see the appeal. "Gather round, everyone," I shouted. It was just about our usual bedtime. Eris was looking for a good spot to place the rolled-up bundle of cloth she used as a pillow, and Ruijerd was beginning to scan the area for enemies with his eyes closed. But tonight, we'd had something to take care of first. "I'd like to call a group meeting." "A group meeting?" Eris said, tilting her head quizzically. "Yes, I expect us to run into a variety of problems on our travels. By talking things through and making some important decisions in advance, we can avoid getting into arguments when time is of the essence." Wait, there was a dubious expression on Eris's face. Maybe she wasn't interested in dealing with the details? Ruijerd and I could probably make all the decisions by ourselves, but leaving her out felt like a bad idea. Eris wasn't a piece of baggage. She was a member of the group. I needed her to participate. "Isn't this that thing you used to do every month back home?" "Every month?" Oh, she's talking about these conferences I held with her other instructors, back when I was tutoring her in Fatoa. I'd honestly forgotten about all those. "That's right. This is the adventurer party version, though." Zipping her mouth shut, Eris dropped herself in front of me with a thump. She was clearly trying to look very serious, but there was an uncontrollable grin on her face. That seemed a little weird. It wasn't like we were doing anything fun here, but at least she wasn't complaining. And that is another thing that I think the books do a little bit better than the anime, is really selling kind of the childlike wonder that Eris has with the world, because at this point she is still a child. Like, I believe she's, 13 at the time? I don't remember exactly. But, you know, it's very adorable. "Am I to participate in this as well?" asked Ruijerd. "There wouldn't be much point to it if you didn't, man. Of course. Didn't you have group discussions like this back when you were in your warrior band? No. I made all the decisions by myself. That was the way things usually worked in this world, I suppose. The leader calls the shots, and everyone else just follows orders. But I happen to grow up in a democracy. As of today, I want to talk things out among the three of us and make decisions as a group." It is also worth noting that Ruijerd was in the military, Or as close, they don't have like formal militaries in the same way that we do in the real world, but there's usually a hierarchy in any kind of military structure because when you're leading a group of people, you kind of have to have somebody giving the orders. Group decisions are good in their right context, but in the context of a band of warriors, not so much. Or at least there are some decisions that can be made collectively, but not every decision can be. Very well. With an easy nod, Ruijerd sat down as well. The three of us now formed a circle beside our campfire. All right, then. I hereby call the first dead-end team meeting to order. Applause, please. Clap, 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 which, again, that's a very Japanese thing. I don't know. It was funny. I remember seeing this bit from the anime, but I don't know. I can't directly relate to that because that's just not a thing we do in America. Rudius, why are we clapping? That's just how these things work. You didn't do this in those meetings with Ghislaine, though. How did she even know that? Well, whatever. This is our very first meeting, which makes it an occasion worth commemorating, okay? That's why we're applauding. Also, we're adventurers, not tutors. May as well keep things lively, right? Now then, as we all know, I recently screwed up big time. No, that was your... Quiet, please, I shouted, doing my best impression of a high-strung lady in triangular glasses. Again, probably a reference that I'm not picking up. Ruijerd, if you want to respond, raise your hand after the current speaker finishes. Understood. Alright then. Now that I'd overpowered Ruijerd into silence, I continued. I have already identified a number of factors that contributed to my failure. I was lax about gathering information, too focused on making money quickly, overeager to kill two birds with one stone, etc., etc. I was going to make a personal effort to be careful about all that, but I also had a more systematic solution in mind. As a precautionary measure, I want all of us to make sure we report when something happens, communicate our thoughts, and consult each other about our options. Report, communicate, consult. That's Rikoko for short. Remember that, please. It's important. Rikoko, is it? I wonder if that is funnier in the original Japanese. I wonder if there's like a pun there, or I don't know. Because I just don't know what the original Japanese would be. And Japanese does have a lot of homophones, so there's a strong idea that... there's a strong possibility that there could be an actual pun there. An excellent buzzword, if I do say so myself. Sounds almost French. That's right. Rikoko. First of all, I want the three of us consulting each other constantly. It is also just, I'll acknowledge, it's funny that Rudy's doing corporate speak. What would this involve specifically? When something's troubling you, or there's something you want to do, bring it to the group instead of keeping it to yourself. To be honest, I didn't have much practical experience with that type of discussion myself, but we didn't have to make this too complicated. Making an effort was the important thing. I'm planning on asking you two for your opinions also. When someone consults you, listen carefully and think the matter through. Ask yourself if it's a good idea or not, and why. Sometimes you may come up with an even better plan or something. In retrospect, I'd made most of my decisions without asking Ruijerd for any input at all. I had always told him I trusted him, but maybe deep down that wasn't true. Secondly, communicate. When you realize or notice something, make an effort to speak up and tell each other about it. Eris was nodding, but the look on her face suggested she was thinking hard. It was tough to tell if she was really following me. Last but not least, report. The details can frequently be important, but you can keep it simple if you want. Just make sure to inform me when something goes wrong, or when something goes right. I was still technically the leader of this group after all. I needed to act like it. Any questions so far, people? And I would also acknowledge that this is another thing Rudy's learning, that, communication is kind of the foundation for any kind of healthy relationship, platonic or otherwise. And he's just kind of applying it to the group dynamics of the party. So he's slowly learning, but he's learning in a very roundabout way, which is subtler than how the anime did it. None. Please continue. Ruijerd shook his head, but Eris raised her hand. I have one. Yes, Eris? So the three of us are going to consult about stuff, but you're the one who makes the final decision, right? Well, at the end of the day, I suppose I will. Why don't you just make all the decisions right away, then? There's a limit to how much I can think through by myself. But I'm never going to have any ideas you couldn't think up, Rudius. It was nice of her to say that, but to be perfectly honest, I was also looking for some reassurance here. I wanted the chance to run my plans past them and hear something like, that should work fine, or you'll pull it off, no problem. Even if that's true, you may say something that gets me thinking in a different way and points me toward a better idea. You think? Eris didn't seem to fully understand the point of this, but that was probably to be expected for now. The important thing was to get all three of us using our heads. Well then, moving on. For the moment, I'd like to discuss our future course of action. Our journey across the Demon Continent had begun abruptly, with no time to plan ahead or prepare ourselves. We were going to have to figure things out on the fly as best we could. First of all, let's discuss our destination. Sorry, cat's being a little weird. Our ultimate goal is to reach the Kingdom of Asura, on the west side of the Central Continent. No objections there, I assume? The two of them nodded. Of course, reaching the Central Continent was easier said than done. We couldn't cross over to it directly from the Demon Continent. There was no sea route that connected them. The fishfolk ruled the seas on this world, and everyone could only travel across them on a limited number of predetermined lines. It's actually a really cool world-building thing that is never really all that fully explored. Ruijerd, how can we reach the Millis continent? Boats travel to it from the west from Windport, the Demon Continent's southernmost city, which meant we needed to head all the way down to the very bottom of the Demon Continent, cross over to Millis, cut across it to the western coast, and catch a boat there to the eastern seaboard of the Central Continent. It wasn't technically our only option. There was something of a backdoor route as well. You could travel to the northwest of the Demon Continent, then cross over to the Divine Continent. This allowed you to reach the Central Continent without going all the way down to Millis. Theoretically, it could cut several months off the necessary travel time. However, this route wasn't as simple as it sounded. The Divine Continent was totally encircled by steep walls of rock. Unless you had wings, it was essentially impossible to make it up there. That meant we'd be crawling our way around the bottom of the cliffs. There were no roads down there, and no stable footing either. There were also many, many monsters. Supposedly, only 1 in 20 who risked that journey lived to tell the tale. On top of it all, even if you managed to survive the Divine Continent, the next sea route took you north of the Central Continent, its most unhospitable region by far. Only desperate criminals with bounty hunters hot on their trail ever chose this option. The potential time game was only theoretical. It would probably take significantly more time if we actually attempted it. There wasn't much reason to put ourselves in mortal danger in exchange for a minor difference in the length of our trip. All of this is cool world building. I like it. Which meant our only real option was to head south. Do you know how much the fare will be? No idea. How long will it take us to travel all the way down there? Quite a while, I'd expect. If we stay on the road continuously, perhaps 6 months? 6 months, even on a constant march? This is going to be a real hike. Is there any way we can get there faster? Like a teleportation circle or something? Nice little nod to later on in the series once they actually do start using teleportations. Like, well after Turning Point 4. The use of teleportation circles was forbidden in the aftermath of the Second Great Human-Demon War. Some may remain intact, but using them would likely be difficult. Huh, I wasn't being too serious, but I guess there really are teleportals out there. So we're basically stuck plodding along on the ground then. That's right. There were apparently no high-speed transportation options to speak of. Traveling for 6 months straight sounded pretty daunting. Maybe I was just thinking about this the wrong way, though. We weren't actually going to stay on the road for months at a time. We were going to move along bit by bit, hopping from one city to the next. Slow but steady. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step and all that. Okay, well, let's think short term. If we start traveling toward Windport now, how long will it take us to reach the next town? We should arrive at a sizable city in around 2 weeks. 2 weeks, huh? About what you'd expect out here, I guess. Do you know if it has an adventurers guild? I would expect so. According to Ruijerd, in the old days, the demon sub-races all created their own small villages, and cities developed as central locations for them to trade, mingle, and exchange information with one another. As a result, most modest-sized towns didn't really exist on this continent, and you could expect any city to have a guild that employed warriors from the local peoples. Originally, before the guild's existence, the cities were protected by warriors chosen to represent the various races living in the area. Sometimes a more warlike people would dispatch additional fighters on behalf of a race who rarely fought. The Supered and Migard apparently had a relationship like that at some point. Marriages between different peoples were also common from the start, as a means of strengthening such bonds between villages. No wonder there was such a wide variety of demons. The whole continent was probably full of mixed-race people. Whoops, wandering a bit off topic here. That is actually interesting because I'm now thinking about this with the context of